Pleasure to be with you here. It's also a pleasure because the first person who gave the lecture last year, Peter Capelli, was the chairman of Wharton's management department when I started my PhD now almost 25 years ago, just to give a bit of a sense of time. And it's a pleasure to be able to do that, to have a meeting there and follow him around. Let me give you a bit of a sense of both what I have done and what we're seeing about the economy and the way that the economy is changing. And I'd like to start by giving you some basic facts about how the world is changing. The first thing is that what we have seen over the last few years is that there is a very big change in terms of who wins and who loses. And if you look at the data, you will see that 52% of the Fortune 500 firms, the biggest firms in the planet, are gone. They're no longer in the list. And this velocity is much greater than the velocity that we saw earlier on. More interesting than that is to understand what is going on in terms of market cap if you take the biggest firms. So think about what happened between 2006 and 2011 in terms of the top firms by market capitalization. 2006, what do we see? We see Exxon, we see GE, the biggest American conglomerate, the biggest European oil firm, Total, biggest American tech firm, Microsoft, and the biggest American bank, Citi. If you go to 2011, what do you see? Pretty much the same idea, other than the fact that China has risen and is now a big power. You see Exxon, you see Apple, and then you see PetroChina, you see Shell, and then you see ICBC, the biggest Chinese bank. The big change happens in 2016, and this is why I think the world has started noticing. Because in 2016, what we saw is that the 5 biggest firms in the world, in terms of market capitalization, were rather peculiar, and they all had something in common. These were Apple, Google, Alphabet, Microsoft, Amazon, and Facebook. And if you're wondering what the list is today, we just updated it a couple of weeks ago, and the 5 biggest ones are, again, Microsoft, Amazon, Apple, Alphabet, and Facebook. And the big difference is that what had been a almost stationary set in terms of the size of the big firms is starting to grow even more. So the question is, what lies behind that? Is it the case that we simply get excited with technology which underpins these firms? The answer is, it doesn't appear to be so. So look at this slide. This slide shows you the sectoral composition of the big firms in one of the other broad-based indexes, Standard & Poor's. So we looked at what are the sectors where these firms that comprise the S&P 500 are, and you can see that they are, the blue is technology, and blue grows up. This is .com and also the time of Y2K, and then crashes, and then increases again. Now, it increases some, but not tremendously. So we have a bit of a puzzle. On the one hand, I'm telling you that the world is changing, that you see this concentration of power in a few firms that are tech-based and also have ecosystems. On the other hand, I'm telling you that it isn't that technology has simply dominated and engulfed the world. So the question is, what is going on here? Well, here's what is going on, and I'll try to explain using an example. Let me just ask the auditorium here. How many of you are familiar with Ant Financial? Show of hands. Okay, so we've got about 3 hands. Didn't see a show going up, Vasily. And it's a bit disconcerting because this particular firm that belongs to the Alibaba Group is the world's most valuable fintech firm. When it went to raise some capital, it raised $4.5 billion, making it worth $60 billion, and today it is valued at around $100 billion. Now, how is it that we have created something that is a multiple of the market cap of the Greek banking system in such a short period of time? Well, the answer is that you have firms that are disrupting the sectors you used to know. What are these guys? Well, these guys started as Alipay. What was Alipay? Alibaba, think about essentially the Amazon version in China, going in B2B and B2C, had the technology and the infrastructure to allow the payments to be settled.
Now, the interesting point is that they used this technology in order to create a wedge. And through this wedge, they started creating positions in all parts of the financial services. So what we saw in 2016, and this is from the documents with which they went to the market to get their first 4.5 billion, they had managed not only to have 450 million annual active users in payments, but also 152 million people that had their wealth management done through Ant Financial. 3 million SME loans, 380 million users of insurance, and 130 million people who are using their credit references. So we are speaking about something that starts as technology and changes the underlying sectors, creating new forms of competition. Since I'm going to be speaking about some of the recent research I've been doing also with BCG, I thought that for good balance, I ought to put something from McKinsey as well. So let me give you a graph from the McKinsey Quarterly, where their own in-house team said, we are seeing the dissolution of the existing sectors and their replacement with ecosystems that are going to reshape the way value is distributed and organized in the economy. So, if this is so important, how can we understand it? There's going to be 5 things that I'll try to address through this talk today. The first question I'll try to answer is, what is changing behind the scenes, and speak a little bit about the changes, the structural changes in the economy that has been underpinning this evolution over the last few years. The second question is, well, even if there's something changing, what exactly are digital ecosystems? They are certainly very exciting and many people are speaking about them, but what do they really come down to, and how do they compare to other ways of organizing? The third question is, why are these all the rage now? What has changed so that we're all trying to think about digital ecosystems? The fourth question is, how should I change my strategy as a result, given that they exist? And finally, how should I engage with or in platforms and ecosystems? So let me start with the first one, and let me start with an image that comes from a London building. Well, the building that you see on your screen is the Great Hall of the Guildhall. And the Guildhall represents the way that economic activities had been organized for a very long time throughout the world. What are guilds? Guilds, syntechnies, are the organizations that create the privileges to particular groups simply because we can't figure out how we would organize them, and we're giving them the privileges in exchange for them ensuring that they do their work right. But it is important because you had economies which were based on providing privileges either to groups of people or to particular groups of firms. Financial intermediation could only be done by banks. Why? Well, because we didn't want people to be defrauded. We wanted to have institutions that we could understand. We could have some common standards. Same thing about law, same thing about all types of services. And what has happened is that although this had stayed for a very long time, over the last 30 or 40 years, we have seen a lack of this desire to support the guilds. And the reason is that we realized that guilds were starting to seek rents for themselves. Rather than doing the work that they were supposed, they were simply there to support the people that were within them. And regulators started saying, well, hang on a minute. If we are now a little bit more sophisticated, do we really need to carry all that luggage? And what you are seeing is this important sea change in the way that we think about regulation, that the regulators are doing something that is absolutely unheard of. If you go to the Financial Conduct Authority in London, you will find something that is called the regulatory sandbox, like the sandboxes where we have children to learn how to play so that they don't really hurt each other. And this is starting to create a trend. And you can see that others in other countries and in other sectors are starting to look at these sandboxes, trying to think about what are the new ways in which we will try to combine economic activities in order to mitigate risk. And they are proactively supporting these structural innovations. And why do we care about it? Well, we care about it because that means that it's a free-for-all. The structures that define, that organize the way the world works, the structures that told us what an industry is, are starting to evaporate. The second is that sectors change and that digital technologies mean that what was useful to make you successful is not going to be the same. Let me give you one example. Perhaps some of you, especially if anyone is involved in construction, might know the answer to this question. Do you know who is the most profitable thermostat company in the world? It's a $3 billion industry. Any guesses? Not Siemens? Honeywell, absolutely. Honeywell, it has been the leader for quite some time. Any idea about who the challenger of Honeywell has been? It is Google, via Nest. Now, why? Well, let's take a look and see how it is that a firm that is based on algorithms and in predicting what you want to type before you type it can also be the firm that will determine how you manage energy in your household.
Okay, most people don't really think about their thermostat. But here's an eye-opening fact. The thermostat on your wall controls half your energy bill. A lot of that energy is wasted, usually when the heat or AC stays on after you've left the house. Programmable thermostats were supposed to help, but there's a hitch. They're incredibly complicated. According to one study, 90% of people don't program them properly, and they all lost the EPA's Energy Star rating in 2009. But what if a thermostat could program itself around your life, not the other way around? The Nest Learning Thermostat does. Nest learns when you change the temperature. So treat it like a normal thermostat. Turn it up when you're cold and down when you're hot. Nest will remember your temperature adjustments and use an array of sensors, sophisticated algorithms, and the processing power of a computer to help it learn. We call it Nest Sense. After a few days, you'll be adjusting Nest less. Within a week, it will put all it's learned into a schedule for your home. Nest will begin noticing when you're gone and will turn on auto away to avoid heating or cooling an empty house. To make the biggest impact on your energy bill, teach Nest good energy-saving habits in the first week. Remember to turn the temperature down at night and when you leave the house. You can control Nest from anywhere using your laptop, smartphone, or tablet. Soon, you won't have to remember. Nest will do it for you. And as Nest learns from you, you can learn from Nest. The Nest Leaf will guide you to more energy savings. Changing the temperature just 1 degree can reduce your energy use by up to 5%. Check your energy history to see how much you saved. You'll see if your temperature changes, the weather, or auto away saved you the most. So, maybe it's time to think about your thermostat.
The other change is that we're all becoming seriously addicted in terms of the use of devices. And I'm sure that this image is not familiar to any of you, has been the subject of some negotiations that we've had in terms of the use of digital devices in our own household. But this is a problem. And it is a problem because it is changing our interaction and the way that we communicate with the rest of the world. That is, on the one hand, obviating some traditional ways in which you link to the customers, and on the other hand, it is opening up some new channels. So we are looking at a world that is structurally different. And what is interesting is that you see some new firms that are able to create bottlenecks and are able to attract the value by positioning themselves in the right places. To give you an example, when we teach strategy, one of the companies that we speak about in terms of their new value propositions and the new ways in which they add value is the Groupe Accor, one of the biggest hotel groups in the world. They've got Sofitels and Novotels and Ibis and Formula One hotels, and we teach value innovation through that. And they are a very profitable company. They make around 5.4 billion euros of profit, last I checked, and they have nearly 500,000 people that are working in the hotels. But what is even more remarkable is that a company based in Amsterdam that has 8,000 employees makes 5.8 billion euros of profit, and it's called Booking.com, because it has managed to interface and link between yourself and the rest of the world. And it has also managed to do that by creating a digital ecosystem. So what are these digital ecosystems? Having seen a little bit about what the changes are, let's move into these digital ecosystems and think about how they differ from existing ways in which we had organized stuff in the past. Now, we probably are familiar with the digital ecosystems because we can see that the things that we use, and think about the mobile telephones that you have, are actually supported by the ecosystems. And organizations like BlackBerry, that we'll see in a moment, failed because they were not able to engender these ecosystems. Or Nokia, perhaps the most famous failure case. And that was summarized wonderfully by Stephen Elop, who was the CEO of a ship that was about to sink, when he said that the battle of devices has become a war of ecosystems, where ecosystems include not only the hardware and software, but developers, applications, e-commerce, advertising, search, social applications, location-based services, unified communication, and many other things. The competitors aren't taking our market share with the devices, they are taking our market share with an entire ecosystem. This means we're going to have to decide how we either build, catalyze, or join an ecosystem. Now, ecosystems are sets of organizations that ensure that the different constituent parts work together, but that is not fundamentally new. We have had things that needed work together in the past. How did we organize them? Well, quite often what we had is someone called a system integrator. If you were an organization and you wanted to have a complex computer system, you would go to EDS or to Accenture, and you would say, here's my needs, and I want to make sure that all the different bits and pieces work together, and that you would have this organization that provides the full set of services, even if it picks from different suppliers. Or you would have firms like Boeing and Airbus that are taking all of the different sub-assemblers and saying, here, software and hardware work, well, at least you hope that they work together, and here they are bundled in a plane. Now, the other thing that you could do is that you have organizations that would pick the different constituent parts and say, you know what, I'm grown up, I can do this thing myself, I don't need to be guided, so I'm going to be doing the integration bit. What is different with ecosystems is that you create some groups that are delimited and managed by the orchestrator. And think about your phones. It is not going to be Apple that will tell you what apps you take, whether they are cheap, whether they are expensive. It's not going to exactly dictate whether they are charged or not, although it's going to say that you're able to charge between that much and that much. And it's not going to be Samsung that's going to tell you what are the applications you're going to get. But it is Apple that's going to say, this is the requirement that tells you whether I want to have this as an app or not. It is a bag that I determine and I drive, and the financial arrangements are things that I decide. I may take 30% cut simply because I provide you with a platform. I will determine just how many of them are going to be inside or not. So now you have these orchestrators, these different actors that have the power to decide the perimeter within which you're able to choose. And what you saw in the first slide, in the most valuable firms in the planet, were these orchestrators that were determining who their complementers are and making money off them. And this is a fundamentally new way of organizing. And since we saw Nest, it may be useful to see about what are the complementers that Nest relies on to make sure that it doesn't only give you a house that is warm or cold when you want it, but that also it combines with other aspects of your life.
All around the world, the home is the center of people's lives. It's where you start your day and end your day. It's where you raise a family and make memories with the people you love. So wouldn't it be cool if our homes could be more aware? If our homes could learn from us and help take care of us? At Nest, we do just that. It all started with the Nest Learning Thermostat. Then came Nest Protect. But for us, that was just the beginning. Our goal has always been to bring this kind of thoughtfulness to the rest of your life. That's what Works with Nest is all about. Works with Nest makes it possible for your Nest thermostat and smoke alarm to interact with the things you use every day. Because we make connections between these different parts of your life, we can deliver personalized comfort, safety, and energy savings without you having to do a bunch of work. We've been working with companies big and small to make this a reality, and we're very excited about what we've been able to do.
Up is a combination of a band that you wear around your wrist and an application on the phone that together help track your movement throughout the day. By connecting your Up and your Nest, you can have this complete effortless experience. Because Up's right on the body, we have this rich contextual set of information about what the person's doing in the moment. And so that means those days that you might wake up a little bit earlier, before you even get out of bed, we can let Nest know that, so it can then adjust the temperature in the room to start to be for my daytime. This is about technology, not for technology's sake, but technology in service of a better life, helping us be more human and allowing us to live our lives better.
Why would we ever bring the thermostat and washer together? That's a good question. If you look at it from a perspective of energy consumption, it's an easy one. These are the big energy consumptions at the home, and they're also the one which require a lot of day-to-day interaction with the consumer. If you have already the thermostat communicating to the utility company, it's much easier. There's one signal going to the Nest, and that is disseminated through the household to all appliances. So basically, reduce consumption now because we're at the peak. It's just a tremendous consumer benefit. It just happens in the background.
LifeX is a LED light bulb that you control with your smartphone. When we first heard about the Nest Developer Program, we were really excited to be a part of it. With Nest Protect and LifeX, when a smoke alarm event is triggered, we can pulse your lights red, which can help you see in the dark, as well as give extra notification that there's a problem in the house, which is especially good if you're hearing impaired. Nest brings this whole other dimension to LifeX. Who would have thought by combining Nest products and LifeX products we could help save lives?
Automotive industry is in a very deep change. I foresee that in the next 10 years, the changes are going to be more substantial than in the last 50. Likely your car today interfaces with your home through the garage door opener. After learning about the Nest Developer Program, we thought about, how can we take this to the next level? How can we, integrate the car better with your home? As you get into your car and drive home, the car will, in the background, send the estimated time of arrival to your Nest thermostat. So your home can be at the right temperature as you arrive at home. Taking workload off of customers, it will improve safety, it will increase comfort, because people just don't have to think about all these things. It's just great, like magic in the background.
At Nest, we believe these experiences are the future. We're able to connect things inside and outside your home to better anticipate your needs. We're already doing some pretty incredible things, but this is just the beginning, and we can't wait to see what's next.
So the first thing that I take away from this video is that Big Brother really likes children's songs. The second thing is that if you think that some of these things are far away, think again. And we may speak a little later on about the geopolitical dynamics of it, because there's going to be some interesting divisions between Europe and GDPR, China, no sense of information support, and the US, which is increasingly concerned about China's dominance, and I think is starting to forget any other priority in this context. But back to ecosystems, what did we see? Well, we see a number of things that need to work well together in order to make sure that they give you the service that you want, and that organizations are trying to see how they can combine. Now, if you think about things that work together, the question is, what really drives it? Well, let me take you to a thought experiment. There are a number of things that need to work well together, but we don't necessarily call them ecosystems. Hot water, tea, and tea leaves, I do work in London, they do work together well and they need each other, but nobody's going to be speaking about the tea ecosystem just because these three need to work together. Of course, it's rubbish. But think about what you may find in your hotels. Think about Nespresso. What is Nespresso? Nespresso is a very simple system which has ground coffee in pads that you can store without being bothered about where you store them and how, that can create an espresso that pretends to have a thick crema and is very straightforward. So it is just coffee in a pod. But here's the catch. Nespresso is a specific system which is connected to the capsule technology. And this technology also works only with organizations that are Nespresso capsule compliant. It's a small but very important difference. Why? Because based on the fact that nobody that would not have an agreement with Nestlé, that owns Nespresso, can work, Nespresso could say, tell you what, I will now create an ecosystem of specific firms that I will contract with that are going to jointly work with me to deliver my system down to the market. I'm going to go to Krups, I'm going to go to Brown, I'm going to go to Jura, and I will create a set of players. I will determine what are the conditions. I'm going to say you're going to be working in the 100 to 200 range, you're going to be working in the 2 to 4 range. I'm not going to guarantee anything. I might or might not, it's my commercial choice, keep a cut on that, or I may think that I make the money in the capsules, so I'm not taking any money. But it is an ecosystem because you are now able to manage them. And what is happening is that although in the past we had some of these ecosystems where the customers were having their own individual preferences, not really controlling what's happening, and someone else was providing the context, they are now becoming much, much easier because of the nature of the interfaces, the APIs, the programming interfaces that bind organizations together. Now, if you think about what you see in ecosystems, is that ventures are using the connection with other firms in order to make money. One of the most profitable firms in the real estate market, a rather stunning growth, is WeWork. It is a 9-year-old venture that was valued at 47 billion after a bit of cash that was injected by the legendary Japanese investors SoftBank. Why? Well, here's a drawing that the founder had and that is still proudly posted on the website, where they said that we don't think about office space, but we think about an ecosystem around the needs of an individual. Now, what do these guys do? They still make money the old-fashioned way. They make money through the appreciation of the value of the real estate. And they leverage like everyone would. But what they focus on is on creating all these complementary activities that will drive value to their underlying investment by covering some needs to the people that use them. So their strategy, their approach of how to grow, of how to be profitable, is fundamentally different. Having looked at how ecosystems are different from other ways of organizing, the next question is why they're becoming all the rage now. First of all, let me tell you that they are becoming all the rage now, and I'm going to give you some evidence not from the tech scene where young upstarts are speaking the ecosystem language, but to some work that we did with Henderson Institute of the thought leadership arm of the Boston Consulting Group. We looked at all of the annual reports of the major firms, i.e. over $10 billion in sales, over $20 billion in market capitalization. And we looked at two things: the incidence of the word ecosystem, and then the frequency of occurrence. And what you can see is that between 2008 and 2017, it has grown 13-fold. Now that tells us something. And what tells us perhaps even more is the next slide. And what we did is we said, well, okay, let's look at the annual growth rates of the firms that mention ecosystems and the firms that do not. And what you can see, if you compare it in any period that we take, is that there is a very clear difference in the annual growth rate. Now, of course, I'm a social scientist, and I understand identification and the fact that correlation does not mean causation. It may be that fancy, fast-growing firms like using sexy language, ecosystem happens to be the sexy language, and that's it. Whatever it is, we do know that there is something to be explained, that there is a difference, and that there is something that is making firms excited. What is making firms excited? Well, we're going back to what are these broad trends, the things that are changing the way our economy is working. And one of them is digitization. Now, in the past, in order to be productive, you needed to be in a factory plant, or even if you were in an office, you needed to be in an office to pass paper together from one side to the next. But what has happened is that digitization has dissolved the need for you to be next to someone else, because your output can be digitized and information can be very cheaply both stored, processed, and sent along. This shows you the amount of total storage that we have, and it shows you how quickly it has grown over the last few years. If you go to what's happening today, you would see going all the way to the floor. If you were to go back, it would literally be a flat line. So we are speaking about something that is tremendously different. There's another thing, an even geekier thing that has been happening that we think, if you look at the research side, that is at the basis of ecosystem, that is modularization. Now, what the heck is modularization? Easiest way to think about it is the difficult development work that the people behind the System 360 in IBM had. And they realized, once they were developing that, you know what, since it's an information product, we're not constrained by physical space, we can decide that we're going to break it up in different components. Why? Every time we try something new, everything needs to work with everything else. It was a bloody nightmare. You could not really fix things. You could not improve things. So what people did is said, tell you what, we're going to have something which is going to be called a BIOS, on top of which we're going to have something called an operating system, on top of which we're going to have something that is called an application, and then we're going to have an applications, and we can each focus on our stuff without needing to bother about the rest. This is what is called modularity, modularization, the creation of these modules, which is very attractive because it allows people to start experimenting and finding out new stuff that works without needing to coordinate. But there's an interesting little catch. Now, this is the technical way of putting it. It's called an Eppinger matrix. This is the way that we map interdependencies in technological systems. There is this thing over here, which means that there is someone who says how all the pieces of the puzzle fit together. And this is what the ecosystem orchestrators do. Because every difference from one iteration onto the next, someone must tell you how do things fit together. And either technologically or commercially, what are the rights we're going to give to each module? How will we tell them they're going to make money? What are the limits to their authority? There is someone that needs to do that. And the more we move in these modular systems, the more these ecosystems become the way that we see things organized. The other thing that's happening is that as we move from traditional products and services, we go to the sexy stuff. Think about the things that we use today. Think about smartphones. They rely on a huge number of different technologies. Why? Because they are simple and we want to use them for complex needs, which means that they have very heterogeneous parts. No one company can do all the steps of the value chain, so they need to combine the expertise that happens from a number of different fields when they bring them together to provide things that are solutions for what the customers need. Sometimes these solutions can even be goofy.
Need a car wash in a hurry, huh? Don't sweat it. Hyundai BlueLink and Washos have you covered. On the Washos app, make a new car wash booking just like normal. And now, thanks to the new partnership between BlueLink and Washos, your mobile car wash just got even easier. Don't worry about meeting the detailer at your car. Using BlueLink's remote access features, they'll be able to locate your Hyundai on their app. And they'll have temporary access to unlock the car to detail and vacuum the interior. And, of course, lock the car when they're done. These BlueLink enhancements help make the mobile car wash experience for Hyundai owners truly hassle-free, even in a pinch.
Nice car.
Thanks.
BlueLink All Access, powered by SmartCar, another way Hyundai BlueLink brings connected mobility to its owners.
So we see the opportunities that exist for finding new ways of covering the needs to customers. And the next question, of course, is what does that mean for us strategically? What are the implications if the world gives us all these opportunities? Well, the first thing is that you will want to revisit your strategy. For a very long time, the automobile manufacturers thought that they had a fairly comfortable life, well, at least compared to their suppliers. They were at the top of the chain. They continued having the majority of the market capitalization, even though they were outsourcing, they were cracking the whip, and they were able to control the way the sector went. But the problem, however, is that someone, Uber in this particular case, came and said, well, hang on a minute. Do people really need cars? And people in car companies said, what do you mean, do people really need cars? Of course they do. Well, no, if they need mobility, they don't necessarily need to own cars. And that was the beginning of something that is now undoing the strategy in automobile companies. Because at the time that a record loss-making company, Uber, was valued more than BMW, that had been producing good cars for a pretty damn long while, it was clear that things were changing. And things were changing not only because the value was shifting away from car to the managers of the mobility, but because it was also changing the attitudes of people that are using transport. And because we saw that the 18 to 25-year-old percentage that was getting driving permits was going down by around 25%. So that started ringing some alarm bells. And what you now see is the two arch rivals, Mercedes-Benz and BMW, joining forces in order to create a competitor to Uber and Lyft that is going to manage your mobility needs, but is going to manage them if you feel that you are this distinguished chap that really deserves and likes high-end mobility. But it's interesting because they didn't only say, I need to now adjust, because the needs are shifting from having a car to providing mobility services. They also realized that the way that they would be able to do that may be fundamentally different. And you see the two traditional German arch rivals that are joining forces in order to compete together. That means that there is a lot of ferment, and now you have different players trying to work the cities or with individuals, and you've got suppliers, you've got automobile companies, and there are webs of relationships as everyone is jostling for position. Because frankly, we cannot take the division of labor for granted. Tell you what, in most companies, in most industries, the industry would not change strategically. Retail would be retail, financial services would be financial services, making cars would be making cars. Same old, same old. We're just speaking about strategy and, would go tap dancing in a strategy retreat and people would feel nice about themselves. But it wasn't really strategy. We had some nice afternoon dinner conversations about how they should be reevaluating the priorities and investments, but it was not really strategy. That is changing. And now you do need to think about, what is my role? Whom do I sell to? With whom do I connect? How do I make that happen? And it is changing fundamentally. And what we see emerging from that is a world whereby the customer needs to be at the center, and the jobs that the customer requires to be done are the things that we're starting to evaluate, which is exactly why things like design thinking and the iterations that exist and trying to figure out how you're going to add value, in which way will you do it and how you compete with others, are important. And when you think about the world seen from the vantage point of the customers, unusual things emerge. WeChat, one of the world's most valuable companies, what they have done is to substitute some age-old habits. Gone are the individual bribes that the tour operators would get from the shops. They're now institutionalized. You have an ecosystem, you have an agreed discount, you can guide people to particular shops, you can also combine that with the way that we engage with the social networks, with the preferences that we have, and it is utterly, drastically simpler from the perspective of the individual who is guided by this device that helps them find the things that they like. But this is not only a testament to the strategic insight that WeChat had. This particular venture was created by KPN, the Dutch former monopoly of telco in the Netherlands. And what these guys did is that they said, look, I will work with WeChat because what they need is some time, and Europe has no roaming charges. What I'm going to do as KPN is that I will have a SIM. By the way, Japanese phones have 2 SIM slots, so you can have your Japanese slot and then you have your second SIM. And this way, me, as a Japanese tourist, is going to receive the SIM card, paid in renminbi. I'm not going to pay anything. Everything will go to the account that goes via WeChat. No need to bother about transfers, about any of these other boring things. And this way, KPN is going to make money, first, because it sells more time. This is airtime that it sells, and it creates a new market that it did not have. Second, because it's got arrangements, not entirely sure what the nature of these arrangements are, for building these ecosystems, for finding the local partners that will go to the Rijksmuseum, that will go to the different shops, that will find the people that will coalesce. So it isn't only important because we see these new all-powerful integrators, but because we also see the opportunity for local players who find new ways of connecting, embedding themselves into that, and finding ways of adding value. And that brings me to the other thing that I've noticed about ecosystems, and it's what I call the yin and the yang. Because on the one hand, these are utterly simple when you see it from the eyes of the customer. It is something that you do not need to think about. Whether you think about Google or about Nest, it is the thing that makes you not have to choose. By the way, when you don't choose, it means you don't look at prices, which means that there is someone making margins. At the same time, the yang is significant shrewdness and complexity in terms of the commercial arrangements that exist between the ecosystem orchestrator and the different partners. And these are the kinds of things that we're starting to unpick in terms of the current research. Organizations like Ant Financial want to create this yin, want to create this simplicity, and that's part of their slides when they're going out to get money. They say, don't worry, I will be there and I will mediate all your connections to the world. Now, what should you do? One solution could be, and many of the companies that I speak to say, great, I understood the lesson. You make money if you are an orchestrator, and preferably if you're one of the world's top 10 orchestrators, which doesn't really give you good strategic advice. It's like saying, well, let me think about basketball and let me think about Giannis Antetokounmpo and, oh my God, I mispronounced that, and I will then try to do exactly what they've done. And the answer is, well, no. These strategies work if you have the underlying skills. So one of the biggest mistakes that we see is the excitement of organizations that like to build ecosystems, thinking, often deluding themselves, that they can be the rivals of the big firms. And I think that it's only few companies that can orchestrate, and whereas it is very attractive to do so, you may want to think about the world a little bit more creatively, which takes me to my other big problem in terms of ecosystems, which is that quite often organizations mix up one fairly critical letter. And they don't think about the ecosystems, they think about the egosystems. They think that the world revolves around themselves. And if you ask them to draw an ecosystem, usually you have the firm, then you have the big tech firms, and somewhere in the distance, you may find the client. Now, for the complementers, that's going to be taking a bit of time to think about it. And I think that the challenge here is to understand that you have choices in terms of what you can do, but that you need to proactively think about what these choices are, and you need to think about how you engage in these ecosystems. So, how should you do that? How should you engage in or with platforms and ecosystems? The first answer is that you usually will not just think about one. You're going to think about a variety, a multitude of different platforms and ecosystems. We worked a little bit with Philips Healthcare, thinking about different ecosystems in terms of delivery, in terms of their innovation ecosystem, in terms of the platform ecosystems for creating the telehealth app. And you see that companies, even companies like Google, don't only have one ecosystem, they have a number of different positions, and you can think about them one objective at a time. And what you see with companies like Apple and Google, that there is almost the corporate level equivalent, i.e., how do I bring positions in different ecosystems so that I cement my ownership of them, so that I can lock in the customers, so that I can be more powerful when I think about the other complementers that I have. The second thing is that you've got different roles in ecosystems. You've got the orchestrators, but you also have partners and contributors. And you may want to think about what is the most appropriate role given where you are, as opposed to, again, being delusional and hoping that you're going to do something that is far outside your reach. Because it will be detrimental to ignore the presence of ecosystems, but I think it's even worse to have the wrong approach and try to do something that is not fit for purpose. The competition in ecosystem is not just for customers. It often is for complementers. And what you see in the ecosystems is that they are competing at two levels. They are competing for the customers, for what the service is, and think about Uber or any other app that you would use, but you also compete for your complementers, for whether it is your drivers, whether it is a broader set of complementers that you have, like Uber, that is trying to find the things that are going to make drivers more likely to use its app rather than another app. And that isn't only for the big guys like Uber. Consider Velocia. Velocia is a small upstart. It's only raised about $1.5 million, and what it's trying to do is to provide a new way of combining different players in the transportation world. What does it say? It says, well, look, cities in particular have needs. Their needs are to make sure that customers have the right behavior. What could that be? One of that could be to have fewer cars. How can we achieve that? By having people sharing cars. Carpooling. In the US, when you see the special lanes that say carpool, because Americans like driving alone in long distances, and the government says, well, let me try to see whether I can consolidate it. Or that they want to use public service. In cities like Miami, it is being significantly underused. So Velocia says, tell you what, I'm going to create a system that is going to create loyalty and reward particular behavior for the people that are in a city. So you will go in Velocia. I will work with the local authorities. I'm going to be working with Uber in order to support Uber Pool, the solution that pools and as such reduces the number of cars that are on the street, and with anyone else in order to make sure that both from the level of the state, you have the objectives that are going to be met, but also each of the individual participants feel that they have something to gain from it. And we're seeing now a lot of experimentation with these companies that are trying to engage with different complementers in order to align behaviors. And what we're also seeing, which is quite interesting, even if you think about it from a democracy perspective, is that we're finding new ways of bridging the public and the private. Not from the traditional monolithic, this is the rule and regulations, but how do you engage with people? How do you engage with companies in order to drive the behaviors that you think are appropriate? And this is something that is gaining traction and is starting not only from the top, but companies like Velocia. But companies like Velocia or even Google need to create communities. How do you create communities? Well, organizations have realized that they need to broaden up, they need to engage. If you think about Google and Google's development communities, they are providing a sense of direction and ecosystem health by presentations that come from their leadership. They provide labs and interactive sessions and help that involve partners and networking opportunities. And they are providing the tools that support, for instance, their artificial intelligence partners, because everyone right now is competing for the people that will work in AI. And they understand that this competition is complicated, because if you work with Google, you will not have the time to go with Apple. And by the way, AI may rest with the operating system, or may rest with the phone, or may rest with the application. So you have Huawei and Samsung battling out with Google and Apple and with the app providers. So we're shifting to a world whereby this coordination becomes ever more important. We see very different types of relationships that are emerging. And again, from the recent work that I've been doing with BCG, we have seen that in different sectors, we have different types of strategic relationships. There are some sectors where we see more joint ventures, and others we see alliances, and others we see M&A, or we see some standardized relationships. And part of the research now is to both understand and prescribe and help guide what is the appropriate approach to take. And I don't think that anyone really has a handle on it. This is what is quite literally on the cutting edge of our understanding. For those of you interested, there's one of the newer things coming out is in a couple of months, the next Harvard Business Review on ecosystem strategy that tries to articulate the different roles that you can play, the different ways that you can co-create value, and the different ways that your ecosystem should be structured. But in addition to knowing what you need to do, you need to change how you work. Why? Because you've got new requirements that are coming up. Consider what's happened with Volkswagen. Volkswagen had one of the oldest joint ventures. In China, it co-built car with SAIC. And it was the way that relationships used to be. One partner, one deal type, one country, one industry. Think about the current, and we just mapped it out, the current relationship structure that you have with Volkswagen in trying to create the autonomous driving. You've got over 30 partners, 5 deal types, 6 countries, and 6 industries. The amount of complexity is significantly different, and Volkswagen itself is struggling to think organizationally, how does it both develop the capabilities of managing it, and how does it house it? Because the collaboration in digital ecosystems is different. You are shifting from a traditional product to smart and integrated solutions, from JVs and alliances to various deal types, from intra-industry to inter-industry, from long relationships to short and highly adaptable relationships. And all these things have serious implications in the way that you need to work. You see, the problem is that organizations are driven by how they have grown up. If you think about the automobile sector, most of the big automobile sectors invested between $500 million and $1.5 billion in mobile, in the new mobile services. Now, on the face of it, this is totally daft. Why would you spend such a silly, ludicrously high amount of money investing in Lyft and in Uber and in Grab that were the 3 big beneficiaries? The answer is fairly straightforward. An investment for a new model in the OEM world costs around $500 million. For them, something strategically serious was around $500 million. That's what drove the price tag. Now, it ended up working out simply because this market took off, but it shows you that organizations and boards and senior leadership teams still keep the same expectations in terms of what they do. Even Apple has fallen prey to its habits. So to give you a bit of the inside scoop in what's happened with Apple, when voice recognition started going on and becoming more popular, Siri was quite advanced, much more advanced than where things are now. Siri has lagged behind. Why? Well, I'll tell you why. The problem was that Apple was an organization that liked being a product firm to surprise by keeping utter secrecy up until it had one of these big trade shows, kept things under wraps for periods of 4 to 6 months, which meant that it could not experiment, which meant it could not have the agility of both a frequent iteration and lots of connections with the AI community, which meant that its own habits cost them dearly in the fight of AI. So we need to think about how we can shift towards a collaborative idea and an emphasis on solving problems with customers and partners, which is not the norm, especially in established firms. And as we start looking at the details, we see that the shift from the what to the how requires significant discipline in terms of the organization, not only in understanding what the ecosystem value and the customer vision and the nature of the partnerships are, the strategic questions, but the bottom half there, the organizational questions, the organizational setup and the way that you find ways of connecting with the other firms. And that's, again, one of the areas of live research right now working with organizations. What we have found as we start looking at the organizational part of that is that some of the inspiration comes not from Silicon Valley, but from China. And for a number of reasons. Not only because you can do lots of things and there are very few limitations in terms of the management of the data, but also because there's a great amount of discipline and excitement, which is precisely why you see the trade war between the US and leading Chinese firms intensify right now. But you see the organizational openness for a shift in a set of organizations that have traditionally been very hierarchical to models that are more dynamic. So if you think about Hire, a company that was nowhere and right now has become a serious competitor in the white goods category, what Hire has a model that it's called the Ren Dan Hei. And essentially the Ren Dan Hei means employees and people, Dan means value of users, and it is the objective is to empower the employees to drive the company where it can find value for both the customer and its ecosystem partners. It empowers the people lower down in the hierarchy to start proposing things in a much more dynamic way in order to make sure that things happen. So I'd like to close on this issue of organization. And since I've been speaking about ecosystems, I thought that I would close with a story that comes from a real ecosystem. And it's a story that comes from evolutionary biology. And it is the story of the Australian jewel beetle. Now, you might ask, what on earth has a jewel beetle to do with strategy? The answer is quite a bit. Now, there is one strategy that species have that has significant impact, and that is reproductive strategy. It is having the male know what is a good female and vice versa. And in the world of jewel beetles, they had it sorted out. A male jewel beetle knew that a healthy female is big, round, brown, and shiny. That worked for quite some time. Now, the challenge was that in Australia, at some stage, came the colonization. With the colonization came people in the outback. With people in the outback came barbecues. With barbecues came beers. With beers came beer bottles. And you may be noticing an uncanny resemblance between a healthy female jewel beetle and a beer bottle. And what you're watching on your screen is a haplessly sexually aroused male jewel beetle trying to reproduce with a beer bottle. The challenge is that not only will that not be met with reproductive success, the challenge is that another species in the environment, termites, understand that in mating season, when you see a beer bottle, lunch may be on the way. On a pragmatic note, I hope that my advice for you and the hope for you is that you will be termites rather than jewel beetles. With that, thank you very much.